Hello friends, and welcome back to the channel, where we delve into the mind of a villain. In this entry, we'll be taking a look at Ra's al Ghul from Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight Trilogy. As Bruce Wayne's mentor in fighting criminal injustice, Ra's would ironically become the source of opposition for two-thirds of the franchise, with his desire to utterly destroy Gotham. While he initially comes across as a mirror of Bruce, he quickly becomes a foil instead, reflected in the contrast between justice and revenge, and between heroism and psychopathy. Ra's comes in at a point in Bruce's life when he is lost. He appeals to his quest by introducing himself as a man who shares his hatred of evil and one who wishes to deliver true justice. However, the teacher-student relationship comes to a fork in the road when they realize they have irreconcilable ideals. Ra's believes that criminals thrive on mercy and thus should be executed without hesitation or pity. Bruce rejects those beliefs and labels Ra's and his followers a league of psychopaths. He holds true to the ideals of justice, believing that the corrupt Gotham can still be redeemed. It is this fork in the road that eventually leads to Raz's becoming a villain, while Bruce goes on to become the savior of his city. One might ask, what made the difference in ideals? How does someone like Raz, who has a past that's no more tragic than that of Bruce's, end up on the opposite spectrum? Just like Bruce, he is no stranger to tragedy, having lost his wife, whom he describes as his great love. And considering her manner of death, being violated in a prison which Raz was supposed to be in, the only emotion that can match his grief would be his rage. He describes it to Bruce as the impossible anger that strangles one's grief until the memory of your loved ones becomes poison in your veins, and you end up wishing the person you love had never existed to begin with. Another emotion that isn't as mentioned but is likely there is also guilt, as it was Raz who was supposed to be thrown into the pit in the first place. Many years later, we find that this grief has still lingered with great intensity in Raz, as he chooses to excommunicate Bane from the League of Shadows, as the very sight of him reminds him of the fate his wife suffered. Raz knows that his anger will destroy him from within, which he advises Bruce and tells him that only vengeance can give him closure. Herein lies the first difference. Raz was able to exact his revenge, whereas Bruce was unable to. We hear Talia's recount of Raz's heading to the pit for revenge against the men responsible for his wife's death, and considering the number of men in the pit, one can only imagine the resulting carnage arising from his vengeance. Perhaps it was in the massacre that young Raz crossed a point where he could not return, where his soul became blackened, where his regard for human life was drowned in the depths of his insatiable rage. With his tainted worldview, he was ripe fruit for the radical and misguided principles of the League of Shadows. In the eyes of Raz, revenge is synonymous with justice, a sentiment that Bruce also held at the start of his journey. But his attempt to assassinate Joe Chill was thwarted by a woman employed by Falcone. It would be fair to say that not enough credit goes to this woman. Unknowingly, she is the unsung hero of the trilogy, so to speak. If not for her, Bruce would have crossed that line and consummated his revenge just like Raz, and would have possibly turned out to become like him. By being deprived of his chance at revenge, it opens the possibility for Bruce to learn that justice is more than just about getting even. For his case, Bruce has the chance to let Joe Chill testify against Falcone, the man responsible for creating more Joe Chills and who stands to destroy everything the Waynes stood for. But for Raz, his notion of justice resembles that of an eye for an eye. We see this most notably at the end, when he tells Bruce that they're now even, since they both burned each other's houses and left each other for dead. There is another key difference between Roz and Bruce that leads to their contrasting ideals: compassion, or the lack thereof. In his training with Roz, Bruce tells him that he traveled the world to understand the criminal mind, even living as one of them, learning the fear before a crime and the thrill of success after. There, Bruce admits that he lost many prior assumptions about right and wrong, and even developed pity for some of the criminals. Roz appears to have had no such empathy, and thus has no compassion for those he captures, being quick to execute without mercy. Perhaps somewhere along the lines of his tragedy, Roz has become lost in his own anger that he remains introspective and cannot sympathize. For him, compassion is a weakness that will allow his enemies to thrive, while killing them is deemed as having the courage to do what is necessary, something he sees lacking in Thomas and Bruce Wayne. On the other hand, Bruce sees that by resorting to the same methods that his enemies use, he would essentially become no better than them. We see this when he recounts being at the mercy of Chill, and then throws his gun in the river, deciding not to kill Falcone. For Bruce, compassion is what keeps him from becoming like his enemies. But while his morals are questionable, not all of Roz's lessons were in vain. Roz believes that in his quest for justice, he has to become more than just a man, something else entirely, a legend. That way, his ideals can never be destroyed. It is this mindset that Bruce adopts, donning the cape and cowl. Later in the trilogy, he tells Blake that Batman can be anyone, just like how a total of 3 people held the title of Roz in the film. One lesson, however, that Bruce didn't learn too well was the minding of his surroundings. But while Bruce literally misses the big picture in the physical sense, Roz is guilty of the same tunnel vision in the figurative sense. In his goal to obliterate Gotham City, he sees everyone as corrupt and deserving of the death sentence. Roz misses out on the fact that in a city of millions, surely there would be a sizable portion of them who would be innocent victims. Again, this brings up the importance of the Batman's no-kill rule. As a vigilante operating on the quick draw, you may inadvertently end up targeting an innocent party. With the Batman's no-kill rule, this effect is minimized since he leaves his victims breathing. But with Roz, he is too quick to condemn an entire city. In fact, the city's corruption would likely hinge on just a select few individuals at the top of the pyramid. In The Dark Knight, we see that the city could be cleaned up after Dent was able to lock up the mob in court. So if Roz were to target anyone, it would seem more expedient to just target the few hundred bad apples than the entire batch. Towards the end of his life, we learn a startling discovery, that Roz was the one ultimately responsible for the death of Bruce's parents. He reveals that the League has tried to destroy Gotham before, previously with the weapons of economics. In his own words, create enough hunger, and everyone becomes a criminal. It was the League which caused the economic depression in Gotham, creating the desperate Joe Chills, one of who ended up murdering the Waynes. While he didn't pull the trigger, Roz could be said to be the one behind it. Joe Chill was just the ripple effect of his actions. The look on Bruce's face says it all. The look of betrayal, that the man who taught him to fight injustice was the one who contributed to his parents' deaths. One might wonder how Roz was able to look Bruce in the eye during his training when he is the reason for Bruce being there in the first place. Perhaps this is why he attempted to alleviate Bruce's guilt by telling Bruce that his parents' deaths was not his fault, but his father's. At the end, before his demise, Roz appears to accept his fate and seems to find consolation that Bruce might have learned to do what is necessary. If Bruce had learned his lesson, it would be all worth it for Roz, and he could die in peace. All this while he was looking for a successor or a surrogate son, considering that he has been estranged from his own daughter. Ultimately, Ra's al Ghul was a villain born of tragedy, but unlike his disciple, chose to become like his enemies and perpetuated the cycle of destruction through his misguided ideals. So what do you think of Ra's al Ghul, folks? Let me know in the comments below. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing, and if you like this video, you can check out some of the other characters here.